Good evening, everyone. I'm Nate Jacobs, founder and artistic director of West Coast Black Theater Troupe. Welcome this evening for our Voices program.
I'm Julie Leach. I'm the executive director. We're thrilled to have you here today.
And I'm Marianne Moss, the chairman of the board. And I would like my fellow board members to please stand and be recognized, because the board is so happy besides being part of this fabulous organization, we are so excited about our Voices program and our other educational programs that we have, and we welcome you. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you. We're so very happy to do a Voices on the theme and subject matter that we're talking about tonight. As many of you know, that was the inspiration for me as an artist many years ago to establish a platform of diversity. I was a part of this cultural community and did not see diversity celebrated, I guess you could say. I didn't know I would be the one to actually birth an organization to see that happen, but like Gandhi said, you are the change you want to see in the world. So I'm very excited about this panel that's here, our distinguished panel, and about the discussion. So I hope you have a great time.
Yes, I too want to thank our moderator, Kelly Kirshner, and our lovely panel for spending their evening with us tonight. We're happy to provide this free to the community. I want to thank some of the people that helped pull it together. So Sheila Weiss, our retiring marketing director. This is really her last job with us. She's done a great job. I'm going to thank METV and Charles Clapsaddle for being here to film tonight. And thank you to Don Daly Photography, who's taking our photos. And then we have some staff in the house. If you just stand up real quick, there's John Secor, our new marketing and communications director. House manager Melena McKinnon's here. Juanita Mumford and Patrick Rossini, thanks for spending your day off with us. Oh, and Deborah Flick-Garrett's right here too. Thank you. Did I miss anyone? Okay, enjoy the discussion.
Thank you very much. As Nate said, my name is Kelly Kirshner. It's an honor to be here. As someone who grew up in the community, I kind of had that same experience as Nate, and greatly appreciate that all he and the theater here are doing to bring that diversity, and as well as some of our other venues that we have here in town. And I saw some folks and employees from the Oslo Rep in the audience. So I think the more we collectively do to engage in these conversations, the better off our community and hopefully our country will eventually be. So out of respect for the good Reverend Nate Jacobs, I wanted to begin this evening with a passage from the Bible, from the very beginning in the book of Exodus. Don't mistreat or oppress an immigrant, because you were once immigrants in the land of Egypt. And I think if you've been paying attention to the political rhetoric probably since the start of the Great Recession, when the topic du jour was, I think it would probably be fair to say that the undocumented immigrant population in this country frequently are the target for blame for a loss of jobs and this structural shift in the economy of a lagging base of wages for our middle class. The immigrant has been a very good soft target in the 21st century, just as it was in biblical times. The unfortunate part about that goes to what Mark Twain told us long ago as well, that it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And so it's opportunities like this to really bring to a venue this evening with all of you who are here, but also thanks to folks like Charles Clapsaddle and METV, to bring that conversation to a larger audience, that we're hopeful that we start having a more nuanced conversation about immigration, the immigrant's experience, and in particular what it means right here in Southwest Florida. So I'm honored to be hosting this conversation with 4 local immigrants who have all of them different life stories that brought them here. And you have very brief bios for each one of them. And so I'm not going to repeat those because we have a lot of ground to cover. And with 4 people on a panel, all of them really are very loquacious. I'm going to go right into the conversation and ask that they draw out their life experience throughout the talk. And then, so you're aware of our format this evening. We're going to start with 45 minutes of questions that I'll pepper them with, similar to a presidential debate. And then after that, we're going to open it up to tweets, Facebook posts, and primarily questions from all of you here in the audience. So be prepared, because we're allocating 30 to 45 minutes for questions from all of you, and I'm sure you're going to have some wonderful questions. Our first question this evening, though, that I think everyone would really like to understand is the unique journey that brought the 4 of you as immigrants to our shores. And we'll start this first question first on my left with Dr. Anila Jain. Dr. Jain, I will say a little bit about her bio. There is probably no greater USF bull than Dr. Anila Jain, who just got back from Sin City in New Orleans, where she was watching with President Genshaft the Bulls knock out the Green Wave, the Fighting Green Wave of Tulane, and like Eckerd College's football program where I work that does not exist, the USF Bulls are still undefeated. So Dr. Anila Jain, if you could tell us about your journey and how do you become such a passionate bull?
Thank you, Kelly. I was born in New Delhi, India, came to Sarasota, Manatee when I was 5 years old. My mother was the only one chosen by the Fulbright program that year to come to the United States from India. So we landed in Sarasota, Florida, because there were some provosts and presidents that were in India for a summer institute. And they said, why would you want to go anyplace else where it's cold? And why would you come to Sarasota? So here we came to Sarasota, a small town at that time, about 30,000 people. I grew up in New Delhi, which was a very large capital city. Both of my parents were from an educational, affluent family. So here we were in this little town where we did not know anybody. And the closest Indian family, there were a few students that were in Gainesville or Miami. So that's how we came to Sarasota, and I've lived here over 50 years, went away to med school, grad school, but you realize this is the best place to be.
Thank you. Next to Dr. Jain is Lucero Guzman. Lucero, can you tell us a little bit about your particular journey? You probably don't remember the specific details at one, but maybe you could share a little bit about that and what brings you here this evening.
Mm-hmm. So I was born in Mexico City, but I moved here when I was 1.5. So as you can imagine, I don't remember very much. I actually don't remember anything at all. So everything that I do know is from memories that I've constructed from stories that my parents have told me. We moved here because of opportunities. And yesterday I asked my parents, what is an opportunity? And they told me they just wanted more choices for my brother and I. I have an older brother, by the way. And back where we lived, we didn't have a lot of money. We lived in a place that didn't have a lot of opportunities. People kind of conformed to what was around them, and what was around them wasn't very much. And my parents said that when my brother and I were born, they realized that they wanted something better for us. They looked around and they said, I want to offer my children so much, but I don't have the means to. The educational system is not the greatest, and if you do want better education, you need to have quite a bit of money, and that's something that we did not have. So I moved here when I was 1.5 to Sarasota because we had family here, and it's a lot easier to arrive somewhere where you know someone. And I've lived here ever since. This is my home, and I don't know anything else but Sarasota.
Thank you, Lucero. Our next panelist, Dr. Eddie Renier. Can you tell us a little bit about Port-au-Prince and then transplanting to the Sarasota area?
Thank you. First of all, I want to say that I'm grateful and honored to be surrounded by miracles. All of us are miracles. And sitting around this table, I feel it's a miracle. My life is a miracle. I was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. My mother was Haitian. Interesting family tree. My grandmother was married to a German, a former German officer who escaped after World War I and started practicing medicine in Haiti, and he married my grandmother. At any rate, my father was from the Dominican Republic. And the two on that island, they don't get along at all. They've been warring for centuries. So I came from a very difficult background. I was born in an upper middle class family. And somewhere around my 6th birthday, there was an election and then a coup, and then everything was lost. And then from there, I spent 2 years living in abject poverty, waiting to be executed. Food was non-existent, and if my family and I had a meal, we didn't know where the other one was going to come from. And then one day, they called us out of this compound, and I thought, this is it, we're going to get shot. And there's a serenity about that idea that it's over, the suffering is over. One more, and it's finished. And instead, they put us in a Jeep. The Jeep drove like a bat out of hell. Next thing we know, we were at the airport, and then we were in America. It seemed that fast. And all I know when I arrived here was, my God, I saw all these, it was the middle of winter, it was December. December becomes a really big time in my life. My second immigration, when I came to Sarasota, happened in December. But when I arrived in Massachusetts, all I saw was snow everywhere, and I thought it was cotton. And I thought these people were crazy. They put cotton on their rooftops, in the streets, everywhere. What kind of place is this? When you first touch something cold like snow, at least my feeling was that it was warm. It wasn't cold at all. But all I know is that my mother passed out when she saw us, when we finally made it through the airport, because we were so malnourished that she passed out. Then something great happened. They took us to a hospital. And in this hospital, the treatment was food, whatever we wanted. Ice cream, day and night, food, eat. I thought I died and went to heaven. And I accommodated them by eating everything they gave me and asked for seconds and thirds. We moved to Boston, Massachusetts, right in the middle of the civil rights movement. Who would have thunk? And went through the civil rights movement. And years later, after I graduated from college, I got recruited by Governor Charles, came to Florida, and I wasn't going to leave because I left a cold place for a warm place. I wasn't going to leave because it reminded me so much of home. So this is really my second immigration. Now, what I remember best about Sarasota, the first month I was here, my family didn't come with me. They said, you can't leave Harvard University, being a professor, and come to a hick town, which what they thought Sarasota was in 1992, 93. So they didn't want to come. I spent a month, couldn't find one black person. And one day I was driving down 41 and I saw a black person who was apparently waiting for a bus. I pulled the car over, parked it, ran to her, grabbed her and said, please, hugged her, said, where are the black people in this town? She must have thought I was a crazy person. Crazy enough, she gave me her phone number and she says, call me and I'll introduce you to them. And that's how I got introduced to Newtown. I tell you, since then, it's been an adventure of love, success. Truly, I think it was a miracle. No one could replicate what happened to me in my life, except it had to be divine intervention. Couldn't have happened any other way. And so there hasn't been a day living in Sarasota I've regretted. There hasn't been a day that I've not found wonderful friendships and family and everywhere I go. It is like the red carpet was opened. All the horrible things that happened to me back then are distant memories. There are times I still remember them. They're not forgotten. And there were times I wake up bathing in sweat, and I think I'm back there. But I tell you, I am so, so grateful to be here. And I'm grateful to be an immigrant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our final panelist this evening is Luz Corcuera. Luz, if you could reflect a little bit on your life's journey that brings you here this evening.
Well, thank you so much for having me on this panel. It's a real honor to be with wonderful people and for us to share our stories. I was born in Lima, Peru, and during the 80s, I don't know if you've heard about the Shining Path. It was a guerrilla group, and they were randomly killing people because whether they didn't like them because they were professionals or they have glasses or for whatever reason. So in one of those occasions, my husband and I had the opportunity to be involved as one of our friends was kidnapped. And it was very difficult, very traumatic for his family. We provided all the support that we needed, but then we thought about leaving just because it was not a place where we could raise a child. We had a 3-year-old daughter then, and so we decided to emigrate. First, we were thinking about going to Australia, where we had friends, and there was a bishop who was a friend of my family, and he wanted to sponsor us, so we said, we're going to Australia. Then just one night, we were at a dinner, and one of our friends invited us. And so there was this person who said, why are you going to Australia? It's so far away. Haven't you considered Canada? And we said, no, it seems like it's really cold, and we don't know anyone. At least we know a bishop in Australia. And this person said, well, you should really apply because there are so many visas for young families, professionals, immigrant families, and as long as one of you speak English, I think you should be okay. So we did file all our papers, and in 6 months, the Canadian Embassy gave us the visa. So it seems like when you talk about miracles and what's providential, you know, it really happened for us. We didn't know anything about Canada. We didn't know anyone, but we knew that it was a place where we could find peace. So my husband and I and our daughter, we left Peru, went to Canada. And Canada is a beautiful country. It's really the problem that it has a very long, cold winter. So we lived there for 16 years, and we added another member to our family. Our daughter was born, and so my kids were really happy. But one day, my husband was transferred to Sarasota. At first, I didn't know. I said, do you mean Saratoga? That's New York. No, it's Sarasota. So we came with him because he was having a meeting before the transfer and fell in love with Siesta Key and fell in love with the city. And so we moved here. We've been in the community for 17 years. And I have to tell you that I feel very fortunate and blessed to live in a community that has a heart. People are really caring, are wonderful. I've worked in different places, and I've always worked with the underserved, the at-risk, all the families that needed services. I wore so many hats, and I never found anyone who was not supportive of what we were doing or what we were espousing. So I feel like all of you, this is my home now. So thank you for having me.
Thank you all. That's fantastic. One of the favorite Sarasota Manatee immigrant stories that I frequently tell about a journey to this area, and I'll share quickly, is a gentleman, a Sicilian young man who left Sicily in 1921 for New York City, arrived there with $30 in his pocket, and many people around town then would deridingly refer to him as a wop, that many would assume would be without papers. And today that would be somewhat kind, considering some of the language we frequently hear. And then similar to the folks that we've heard from today, eventually he arrived in Bradenton in 1947. When he was in New York City, he had a little fruit stand, though, and one of his favorite fruits were the citrus that came from Florida that inspired him, similar to Luz and her family. Well, I guess they were moved by force from Canada to Saratoga or Sarasota. But he wanted to get into a warmer environment too and came to Bradenton. And he started a little company that some of you may have heard of called Tropicana. So that immigrant went on to, his company was eventually sold to the Pepsi Corporation for $3.3 billion. I believe still today it's probably the largest employer in Sarasota and Manatee counties. It employs over 5,000 people. I don't think all of those are locally, but you get the idea of the power of an immigrant by hearing that story and seeing it so close to home. So maybe the next question, I'm going to start targeting you a little bit more individually, and we'll just keep the order. Dr. Jane, maybe as a 5-year-old, we've heard a hick town from Dr. Eddy. I think a lot of us who grew up here resent that. When he said that, it reminded me of Dick Morris, that some of you may remember started the Sarasota Film Society, and Dick Morris told me at one point when I was a young whippersnapper out of college, he asked me if I knew what the cultural elite was of Sarasota, and I said, no, sir, and he said, well, let's just put it this way. On most evenings, they're wearing tighty-whities, sitting in front of a TV, eating a Hungry Man dinner, watching Fox News. So Dick Morris had a way of putting things into words. I don't think any of you clearly would comprise that demographic because you're here listening and participating tonight, and obviously that's changed a lot since the early 90s when Dr. Eddy got here as well. So on that line, Dr. Jane, maybe could you talk about that community you did come to when you were 5 years old? How was your family received, maybe some of those experiences? And then from your own perspective, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and then how do you decide then as an adult, this is the place I want to be? And for those of you who have seen The Heights, I think the closing line is by this Dominican, this is my island. How did you choose this is my island?
I think coming at that age, we were received very warmly. Looking back at the news clippings, papers, they thought it was just wonderful. Here was this Fulbright teacher coming to teach at Riverview who had multiple degrees, and she was asked to speak at every church, every Rotary, every Kiwanis club. But we didn't forget our heritage. It was very important. We went back to India every summer to visit grandparents. They thought I should know the culture, the language. We made 35 plus trips. We went to India for a while, and then we would travel somewhere else in the world. They said the cultural experiences that you have, and when you meet other people, you always go with an open mind. With that, Sarasota, went to school at University of South Florida, went to med school in Texas, and then got the executive MBA. But the main thing was the town has grown by leaps and bounds. The culture, the arts, everything else is such a vibrant part of this community. And when you talk to people, I live in Florida, I live in Sarasota, Manatee. Oh, you live in Florida. There's not much to do there, the beach and this. So you try to explain to them, if you look at the Seasons magazine and the amount of events that we have in this town, you could be at something every night and more than one event. And I think we're just a culturally rich area that now people are finally finding the gem that we are. But I think overall, Sarasota has grown in positive ways and negative ways. You see some negativity, but I think if you look at how diverse the population is today, how wonderful that when you meet people from all over, not only the United States, but all over the world, and you look at I know my parents have been involved in community, UNA, so many other things. We have the largest foreign service organization. You talk to individuals and you reach out to them to tell them about their experiences in other countries, other parts of the world, and then you realize what a wonderful place we live in. And I know, like I said before, I went away to college, came back home. When we went to India, it was a very different lifestyle. My grandfather was the personal pediatrician to the President House and Prime Ministers Nehru, Gandhi, and others. Wow. So I grew up in a different lifestyle. Coming to the United States, I did not have a nanny at 5 anymore. I did not have somebody to take care of me all the time. But I think that made me into a stronger individual because I was always giving back to the community. I've done medical missions all over the world, worked with orphanages, and all. So I have given back, and right now I also mentor young students. I was talking to the young lady, Mari, she's at USF Sarasota Manatee, and I serve on the Board of Trustees of USF, and my main thing is giving back to the community and mentoring young women and young men. So hopefully they'll succeed and stay in our community.
Thank you. So Lucero, it's appropriate you're right next to Dr. Jane, and we won't talk about ages, but you're a couple decades forward from her experience, and you have parents that coming from different experiences from Mexico, and I was wondering if you could talk about growing up here, and then maybe how you as a child would support your parents that I believe on arrival did not speak English, and how you helped as a child them navigating that experience of integrating into this region and the community.
So when we moved here, my parents didn't know English, and I was one, so I spoke a little actually, but everything I did know was Spanish because my parents taught me what they knew. My brother was 4, I believe, and he also only knew Spanish, but since we were younger, we caught on to the language very quickly. For me, I didn't face that many adversities that I noticed. My parents protected my brother and I a lot, so we didn't see a lot of the bad that maybe a lot of other children would have seen if they didn't have as supportive parents. But I feel like it's kind of funny because whenever we went places, my brother and I were the ones that were kind of in the front, ready to tackle on any question that someone asked us. And we were both maybe like 4 and 7, because my parents didn't know what they were saying sometimes, and they could figure out some things, but sometimes you do what you do when you don't know, and you smile and nod. And when that happens, sometimes you miss important information. So my brother and I would try to translate things, translate letters we got, and I think that's kind of the main way that we, I guess, helped my parents when we got here. But I think on the other side, it's very important because they were always supporting my brother and I. The reason we came here was for an education. They knew that we couldn't have what they wanted us to have where we were from. So they supported us a lot in terms of always having us do things that were productive for our brains. So we would be at the library all the time. We would go to GWIS when that was still existing all the time. We would go to theaters. We would go anywhere. My mom taught us how to continue learning Spanish even though we were in a place that English was a predominant language. So I just wanted to include that because I think my parents also played a huge role in helping my brother and I.
That's excellent. Kind of sounds like the American dream, right? Yeah. Dr. Eddie and I had a fun conversation this past week on the phone, and he said something that struck me. He said, in the information age, it seems more and more that we're entering into a new dark age. And I was wondering if you might be willing to speak on that, Dr. Eddie, and how that might relate to this conversation that we're having as a nation on immigration, but maybe a larger context if you want to go there. And I know we probably could spend the next 4 hours on that, but.
Thank you for that question. First of all, the whole nation is a nation of immigrants. From the Spaniards who arrived here in California to the Pilgrims who landed on Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts, all immigrants from Europe. The immigrations from Europe continue to come even to the present day. And so the only natives here are Native Americans. So we are all of us, immigrants. Interestingly, we live in a time that information comes at us every second on all our devices, whether it's an iPhone, TV, so much of it being pumped at us 24/7. And I think that for many of us, we can't process it all. And so while there is so much information out there, so when you talk to average Americans, they seem to know so little. And you wonder, how can that be? How can that be? With so much information, you just type anything on any device, and you can get all kinds of information about it. And yet you ask some Americans, how many states are there in the United States? They tell you 53. And you hope, you pray, that they're going to tell you Guam and Puerto Rico.
Still got another one to go.
51 and 52. But this is not what you get. They look at you and they say they don't know. You ask them, what is the capital of Florida? And they don't know. There's such a lack of information. I think that we really are entering into a time of a dark age. We are living in a time where science doesn't matter anymore. In fact, facts don't matter. People tell you, I believe. I was talking to a student who tells me that she didn't believe in global warming. And I had hoped that she was going to say, I read the articles, the anthropological studies, the archaeological studies, and I have done some research of my own. I even traveled to the North Pole and took some samples. And I know that there's no global warming. She said, no, I'm using my brain. Well, I said, well, I'm glad, that's good. That's a wonderful thing. But your brain plus something else. You need your brain and something else. What else did you do to come to this wonderful conclusion? Because I hope you're right. I hope there's no global warming. Then I can relax and go enjoy the beach. And I was not able to get any intelligent information. In fact, when I talk to people again and again, what I get is this rejection of science, an embracement of theology, not theology based on fact, but theology based on belief and superstition. And this is so pervasive in our society right now that, in fact, if you say you're a scientist, that you almost scowled on and looked down upon. And being a scholar, I know we went through this before. This is not the first time, or the second or third. We've been in dark ages before. When you find people tell you, I believe, I know, and they haven't studied or read one thing about the Middle East, but they know how to solve the problem in the Middle East. They haven't read a thing about Israel. In fact, they can't tell you who runs Israel, the history of Israel, but they can solve the problem between Israel and the Palestinians. You ask, well, how did you get to this place where you're so knowledgeable? I hope I was going to hear something, but I've been watching the news very carefully. I've studied the Fox News and CNN. I've read some things, and this is, after doing all that, this is the conclusion I come to. They tell you, I just know. And they say I know with conviction. So I'm convinced we are living in a time of dark age. And I'm hoping, unlike the first one and the second one, this is short-lived. Yeah. That one day we'll say, you know what, I don't know. And my belief by itself can't solve any problems. That I really need to engage in some scientific inquiries, some methodology of how to acquire knowledge. And maybe I need to work, I need to open some books, I need to make some phone calls, study original research. And maybe if I do that, I can actually begin to get an idea what are the problems in the world. Unfortunately, today I can't tell you that this is true. What I see is people, masses of people, who tell me, I believe. And that belief is based upon something nebulous, something unbelievable, shallow. And on that note, they make decisions about their family, they make decisions about this nation, they make decisions about what schools and what resources they need, how to invest on that belief system based on very shallow information. They make very important decisions. And for me, I'm just appalled, and I don't know what to do. How do we change this culture of belief to one of knowledge? That's what we talk.
Yeah, thank you. We can only hope that Mr. Zuckerberg's recent announcement that they're going to pay close attention and pull down fake news and these types of things, that might be a start in having better conversations, but we'll see. Thank you. So, Luce, you work every day in this space, really largely with the immigrant community here in Sarasota and Manatee counties, and you've been doing that for probably nearly 2 decades. One of the topic du jours right now is this DREAM Act, and we have a program that was authorized by the Obama administration to allow children who were brought here, that a child who is brought by his or her parents does not have any intent to break a civil law, and so the justification of this was these were children similar to Lucero that you're seeing tonight, and it's great to have Lucero because this is no longer the unreal other. This is someone of flesh and blood who's our neighbor who you can get to see and appreciate the face of some of these young immigrants. But could you speak, and maybe for those that don't understand, what is the DACA program? And what is this conversation that's raging right now in Washington, D.C., and maybe draw that out and what that looks like locally, how that impacts families and young people here, and maybe what you prognosticate might happen in D.C. if you can do that?
I don't have a crystal ball, but I just want to point out first why I became so passionate about the Dreamers or the Dream Act. When I came to Sarasota, my older daughter was a junior in high school. And one day she came home and she told me that one of her best friends, who was very smart, was not allowed to take the ACTs, and because he didn't have a social security number. And he didn't know that he didn't have one because his parents had brought him here when he was 2 years old, and he grew up oblivious to the fact that he didn't have a social security number. So I was trying to understand, and in investigating and talking to different people, how could this happen? Why is this kid, who is so bright and smart, not being allowed to take the test? And therefore, his chances of getting into college are going to be none or very slim unless he pays as an international student. And so I have to say that it was USF, Dr. Smith, who was the dean of the College of Engineering, who gave me an appointment. And we talked for a long time, and he helped this particular kid with an out-of-state tuition waiver because he saw that he was bright. He understood that he never made the decision to be here and not have any papers, not to have a social security number. So from that day, I became a passionate advocate of the Dreamers. And the Dream Act is something that would protect enormous talent. We have over 800,000 kids who have been protected by what we call the DACA, which is the executive order that President Obama gave in 2012, to give these kids an opportunity to use their name, a permit to get a driver's license, a permit to work, but most importantly, to get an education. And because of that, the students have gone into higher education. Some of them have graduated with bachelor's degree. There are others who are pursuing master's degree. Not everybody was eligible for the program. So we are not talking about a whole continent. And also there is a myth that they think the immigration problem is only south of the border, which is not true. We know that there is migration all over the globe, that there is only a small percentage of people that can afford to live a decent life, that 2/3 of the population in the world live under extreme poverty. And so Lucero was talking about having an opportunity. I could name my dream the Peruvian dream, to give my kids an education and live in a place where there is peace. You could name your Haitian dream. We could all name. Basically, it's not the American dream only. It's the dream to have a life of dignity. It's a dream that every parent has, to give their kids the chance to have an education and to do well. Let me tell you that I met the most amazing, wonderful dreamers. They are extremely talented. They are hardworking. And I have the fortune and the privilege to work with some of them, and I have met their parents. Those are the families that we want to keep in this community. Those are the families that we need, with really high standards of ethics, hardworking. These kids work 2 or 3 jobs while they go to school. They have AP classes. Some of them are doing dual enrollment. And let me tell you that in the past year, I've seen how colleges are fighting for them. They want to have those kids because they are promising. They will add something to their colleges, and these kids are worthwhile for us to keep fighting. So with the new administration, the immigration discussion has been taken to another level. We are now facing this type of rhetoric that immigrants are rapists, are criminals, that we are here to milk the system, and that we take advantage of everyone, which is not true. First of all, the immigrants that we are talking about that do not have the proper documentation, they cannot get any benefits. They are not here to milk the system. And the dreamers are working extremely hard to be able to get their education. What are we gonna do if this program is canceled? Are we gonna deprive ourselves of having tremendous potential that will be our future? Do we want to deport the future doctors, the future pediatricians, engineers, accountants, nurses? Is that what we want to do? And so right now, there are so many conversations going on in Washington. And personally, I don't really care whether they pass a law that has whoever's name they want on it, as long as the decision makers come to an understanding that this has to have a humane and comprehensive solution. They can't just talk about it. They have to do something. They are negotiating. They said, okay, we are going to protect the dreamers, but their parents have to be deported. Do we know how traumatic it is for someone to be separated from their parents? Would you be willing to be separated from your children if that was the case? I don't think any parent would want to be separated from their children. So this is a discussion that is going on, and I think as citizens of this community, as citizens of this country, it's our moral obligation to use our voices, to use our votes, and to push for comprehensive immigration reform, but a special protection for the dreamers, because they cannot be left out in the cold. And also, I was reading the news this morning that there are groups that are suing the current president because they say that it's unlawful for him to just rescind what President Obama has approved. So that's the situation. It's very sad, it's very traumatic, and it creates a lot of anxiety for the kids and for their parents.
Thank you. Lucero, do you want to maybe add anything to that? I think as the perspective of someone who just recently graduated from high school, and you've been working now with Unidos now, and so you know a lot of students in the area that are coming from immigrant families as well. Do you have anything that you'd like to add, specific to the perspective of that student or immigrant who's here and is being used really as a political toy right now?
Well, I actually am that student. I'm a DACA student, and I'm proud to say that. I think building off to what Lou said, something very important about this is not just about the DACA students, but it's about their parents. They like to sell DACA students like the perfect package because we have a lot of things, qualities that people admire. We're dedicated, we're perseverant, and we've overcome so many obstacles. But I think that the reason that people admire us are because of our parents. And I refuse to have anyone say that my parents shouldn't be here. So I think that's a very important component of this. Also, as a DACA student, there are some adversities that we had to face. We don't get a lot of benefits that a lot of people who are citizens do, and a lot of people don't realize that. A lot of people actually didn't know what DACA was until this recent thing that happened with the president. I had a lot of issues with being a DACA student just because I was graduating from high school, because the college application process was a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be. I always knew I had to work a little harder than the people around me just because of that, but I had no idea that there was going to be so many other obstacles thrown my way just because of my status. For an example, if I wanted to apply to the University of Florida, originally I would have had to pay out-of-state tuition because I'm considered an international student. Luckily, there is a waiver that I can fill out so that I can have in-state tuition. The issue is I still don't get any financial aid, so FAFSA doesn't do anything, and the schools can't give me money. I'm local, because I love my city and also because I can save a lot of money studying my first few years here in Sarasota, living with my parents and paying the tuition with some generous scholarships as well. I have an older brother who is currently pursuing a mechanical engineering degree at UCF. He had a lot harder of a time than I did trying to even get into college. He got into a Florida school, but with a full ride. He started going to school and they took the scholarship away from him because they said, we didn't know that you were a DACA student. And he was living there, so he was paying for housing and meals and tuition. So he was there one semester and he had to come home. But then he went to UCF, and luckily by then they had figured out the whole in-state tuition thing because he was paying out-of-state tuition, which is very expensive if you're trying to go to just a Florida school. So luckily now he's here in UCF studying mechanical engineering. He's in his 4th year, and he's a very, very bright young man. Yeah. That's pretty much what I want to add. Just from a personal experience, we do work very hard. We're not here to take anything. We're here to give back. I recently did not a lecture, our teacher gave a lecture on diversity at school. And something that I drew as a conclusion from that was that diversity brings innovation and productivity. So looking at it from an efficient point of view, I think it's very good to have us here because we bring different perspectives to the table. We can make anything go faster, bring different ideas. So if ethics aren't something that you're interested in, the productivity that we will gain from having us here should be enough.
We're going to open it up to the floor for questions, but Lucero, maybe just to follow up, could you tell everyone what is the difference between in-state tuition at a state university versus out-of-state?
I don't know the exact numbers, but it's almost triple. And if you're not getting any help either way, in-state tuition can be pretty difficult to manage if you didn't know that you also didn't qualify for federal aid. So that was also an issue for me. I had to find scholarships that were private, because it's not that people are bad people, but it's just written that it needs to be a U.S. citizen who you're giving the money to. So a lot of things I thought that I was eligible for, I wasn't eligible for. And that's something that when I've spoken to people that are also DACA students, a lot of them say that they feel lost and they feel like they don't know where to start looking because they have no idea where they're going to be able to find money to pay to go to college.
So many of these students also are valedictorians of their class. There was a case not too long ago. A gentleman went through Florida State University, was the top of his class, went to law school, was the top of his class, then was denied to take the bar exam and he was very fortunate. The then president of Florida State had taken him under his wing, and then he became a Senate president. But I'm just thinking it took several years for him to even be able to take the bar exam. You've let these students go to this certain level, they've graduated with honors, and they're really productive citizens in our community, on our university campuses, they're leaders, and it's just a shame to deny them an opportunity of quality education.
It's cutting off your nose to spite your face. There's a great quote from a longtime Auburn University professor talking about similar laws that were penalizing undocumented students in that state, the meanest, most hateful thing I've ever read. One of these things comes back to what Dr. Rainier was talking about, that people, what they know for certain in their gut, that Mark Twain was talking about. One of them is that the undocumented immigrant freeloader doesn't pay any taxes. So I just want to have a fun exercise. Lucero, if you don't mind, when your family goes to shop at Target or Publix, do they pay sales tax?
Yes, we do, and I would also like to add that we do file taxes, but we don't get anything in return at the end like everyone else does.
And another question, when they go, I'm assuming you have an automobile, or when you go and buy gas, do you get a special exemption and not pay for gas tax by being?
I really wish, because I would save some money, but no.
Yeah. Will your parents get any Social Security benefits even though they've been working here for, close to 20 years now?
No.
No. Your parents rent, I'm assuming they probably have the ad valorem property tax built into that rent. Do they get an exemption from the landlord to not pay that?
We actually have our own house, but I have no idea how any of this mortgage stuff works, but I just know that we pay the same amount.
Yeah. So and that's just an illustration of many of, if you want to have a conversation about it, let's have a conversation. Let's not just vilify people, this visceral instinct that is as old as biblical times about it. Let's be honest and have a conversation and not beat that political piñata, which has been used fairly effectively for many millennia. And to Dr. Rainier's point, the Dark Ages should be left in the Dark Ages, and in an information age, it's incumbent upon us to have better conversations. So thank you for answering all those questions. We're going to open it up now, and I think Ms. Sheila has a mic, and so if you could just raise your hands. Looks like Charles Clapsaddle's raising his hands. I'm just kidding. We've got one right back here. If you could say your name and maybe stand because you're going to be on camera too, please.
Oh boy, not camera.
Yes.
Oh geez. Hi, I'm Vicki Oldham. I operate the Newtown Alive project, and I experienced something personally that has really spoken to me in a very deep way. I am a former news reporter, and I've seen the stories about immigrants from Mexico and so forth. But I had the pleasure of becoming friends with a Mexican immigrant. And we got into conversations about how we got here, crossing the Rio Grande, the dangerous waters. And he told me about having to jump on a train and walking for days just to get to the United States, to enjoy the opportunities, as your parents said that they brought you to this country for. And then we talked about his working. He's a construction worker. He pointed out all the buildings that he's built here in Sarasota, with mostly Mexican crews doing work that those of us who have been here wouldn't dare want to do. I wouldn't want to work in that scorching, sizzling heat, building anything. So, it made me certainly way more sensitive than I've ever been regarding this particular plight. And I do want to do something to help. I just don't know right now what I can do, except I called an attorney friend of mine because, talking about the dreamers, yes, you're losing some you'll lose if this present administration gets its way, but the parents, he's afraid that he might be deported and all of this. It is just crazy. What is it that we can do to help at this point?
Who wants to take that one?
Well, I can start.
Yeah.
I think, first of all, this is the first step by having this conversation and addressing the issues as they are and stating the facts. This is a good point. I think all of us have an obligation to educate our friends, our neighbors, our family members, because they are under the impression all these myths and lies and rumors that have been spread out. I want to add that it's not only that Lucero's parents do not enjoy Social Security benefits, they do support with their taxes the pension that so many people are getting today. And that's where the taxes of undocumented people are going to support the Social Security system. So that's another issue. I think it's important to talk about the facts, to educate other people, but also to put pressure on our representatives. Most of the time, they don't want to talk about immigration. It's a conversation that makes them uncomfortable, but also it's going to alienate their bases because they are going to be voting against them or they will not be reelected. So if we put some pressure on our representatives, that comprehensive immigration reform is due a long time ago. Are you familiar with the immigration system at all? Do you know how complex it is? When people say, why don't you get in line and apply for a visa just like many of our ancestors have done? I want to say it all the time, there is no line. There is no line. It's a very cumbersome, complex system. We need to have a comprehensive immigration reform. That will really solve the problem so that there will be some parameters for people that have been here for a long time, and there will be a system for people to be able to, so we know who is here, they can come out of the shadows, they can use their names, they can work legally, pay more taxes perhaps, but also they can contribute to support this system so that no one feels affected that this is going to come out of our pockets. So there is so much that we can do. And as a community, I think it's important that we have this conversation in our own neighborhoods, in our churches, everywhere. Because education and information, as you were saying, are two different things. You can have the wrong information and spread the rumors, but if you have the right information, you're educating someone.
I might just take the privilege of the mic, too, to respond to Ms. Oldham's great question, too, and appreciate you asking it, and I think your point. You all who've lived here for any appreciable amount of time, particularly during the boom of the first part of the 2000s, if you went to any construction site in Sarasota or Manatee County, all you would hear was Spanish. And no one was saying a word. And particularly our development community never said a word. And we're complicit in what is really a magnet that also draws those jobs here. And we're but a vignette of the entire country. We've had Palmetto, that next to Immokalee is the tomato breadbasket of this country. And no one has said a word for many, many decades, to your point, about who's going to go in the field and pick that. And by the way, they tried that in the state of Georgia and had hundreds of millions of dollars of lost peaches, blueberries, etc., about 3 or 4 years ago. And that was quietly stopped immediately after. And so one of the things, just echoing what Luz would say, is how dare us as a community that we're complicit in this? Like, we talk about the offenders, but it's similar to the drug epidemic. We never talk about the demand. And so where is that similar strident demand on a national level that if you are a corporation, if you're a development community or a constructor that you're going to hire after we pass comprehensive immigration reform, I'd love to see felony convictions for those people then. Let's talk about true, robust immigration reform that is not penalizing these people that came here and were welcomed and accepted. And the only time you heard it was in the Great Recession. And so then we can look for a political foil for us, and it is that undocumented immigrant. That's my sense, and maybe I'm talking too much from the gut that Dr. Rainier would say. Got two hands raised back here. I don't know if employees are allowed to ask questions, Julie.
Roger Skidmore. One comment about the people who say get in line. Back in the day, there was no line. Everybody just got on the boat and they came over and they got off the boat and they were welcomed. It's now that we've had the problems of economic adversity that everybody's concerned. But from my own personal experience, I had a house built in Atlanta when I lived there. And at 7 o'clock in the morning, a pickup truck would arrive and 10 or 12 Mexicans would jump off, and they built the walls of the house out of stone. And around 10 o'clock, the white workers would come to work on the roof and then make adverse comments about the Mexicans who didn't work. And I found, and by the way, when we had our housewarming, the Mexicans were invited. And I think that if we would speak to the people that do work for us, we might find how really nice they are.
Thank you. I've got one down in front.
I just wanted to briefly point out that the back of your program contains the phone numbers and addresses of the local representatives that represent us and can do something about this. So we do hope you will follow up and call. Calling is the best thing to do. Writing a letter helps too, but it takes a long time for them to open it.
And I'll just add to Julie, we see that for those of you that watch Showtime and the series Homeland, does anybody watch that series? This past season, is fiction creating reality, or does reality imitate fiction? And there was a scene where they go into a secret room that was being run by the CIA, where they have hundreds of individuals putting up fake news on websites, and then we learn, well, there's Russian groups that are doing that. And I would say that in this context because we think, and I think a lot of times we just throw our hands up right now, whatever your persuasion is, that we have no power. The first thing I'll say is, you don't even necessarily have to call. All of you, most of you are on social media. Call out, excuse my French, Charles Clapsaddle on METV, call out the BS. There is information out there that you heard this evening from Lucero, the family, how the family pays taxes. You can respond with an educated voice in a cogent fashion and talk some truth to ignorance and speak to those issues. And then, similar to Russians that persuade things, maybe we can persuade each other with real information and facts as well. Yes, sir.
My name is Ed Morris. I'll be very short. In the year 2090, this kind of a conference will take place again, because that's been history. And there's no solving the have and have-nots. And we just have to go through it. And this condition is a human condition that is always going to be with us.
Well, that's probably why I started with the book of Genesis. And we perhaps haven't learned too much from it. You know, it's interesting, we hear a lot about Christian conservatism, and you'll actually, depends on the church you go to. There are some churches that are very outspoken on this issue, in spite of perhaps their congregation that don't necessarily feel that way. I don't know, would any of you like to speak to, is it your last name again, sir? Morris. Mr. Morris, what he just commented, Eddie?
If I may, I take a different view of this a little bit. I don't think we have an immigration problem. We have a fear problem. And the fear is that our way of life is changing. It's changing radically. There's no longer any middle management jobs. We're seeing less need for people. I went to McDonald's with my son who was visiting, and I went inside, and there was a line, and so he instantly went to the side. There was a kiosk, and he pressed some buttons, and then he went and waited for his food. And I looked at why there was a line. There were a few people working in a store. I went to, and I didn't see any Hispanics, by the way, hanging around McDonald's. There were a few people working there, but there were a lot of machines there. I went also to the bank. I don't do a lot of banking because the wife does all the banking. She handles the money, and she just tells me how much I can spend. But that's nice. And I don't complain because she's a saint for coping with me. But I went to the bank. And there was only one teller there, and I remember a day there was 10s and 20s of them, and they told me go out and use the ATM machine, and don't you know you can deposit your checks on your phone. I looked around the bank. I didn't see Hispanics hanging there either. So the jobs are going. It's not Hispanics who are taking it. It's not immigrants who are taking it. Machines are taking it. And so we have fear. We have a lot of fear. And as the machines come online more and more, and accelerating how they come online, we see the day is coming soon where we're not going to have a job. And no one's talking to us about that. No one's talking to us, how am I going to earn a living if there were no jobs? What am I going to do? If I'm a cab driver, if I'm a bus driver, if I'm a truck driver, what am I going to do when they drive themselves? I went to a farm. My family in Kentucky have farms. They have this. They just bought this great big tractor, and it tills the soil. It dumps chemicals in the soil. It pulls out plants that are bad. My families they're not in the field anymore. They're in the house looking at their computers. This thing is doing its job. So there are really big cultural things and sociological things going on. Huge. No one's talking to us about them. But we can feel it in our bones. We see it coming, another dust bowl, where the machines are employed and we're not. And that scares the heck out of us. So it's a convenient time, in an age of darkness, we don't believe in science, to say, get them immigrants. You know, that's only going to work for a little while. Because eventually, even the dumbest of us are going to open their eyes. And they're going to look around. They're not going to see any immigrants in the banks or driving the bus or cutting their grass. There's a machine now that lays bricks. They're going to see any immigrants working in construction. And I'm not talking about 100 years from now. I'm talking as we speak. So I think the problem is fear and with no answers. That's my thought on it.
I'm Dr. Mona. Is it on? I'm Dr. Mona Jain, and I'm going to just take few points. We have been here, our family, when there was segregation, then integration was there, and a lot of people don't know that we from Asia were not allowed to get citizenship. And then in 1965, and with the civil rights movement, all these things came along. But what I have noticed is that we say that this country, our country is made of immigrants. And we are very, very strong country. But then I say, okay, if we are such a good country, then they will start giving the example, look at this country, look at this country. I said, we don't look down, we always look up. If we are doing great, we are the greatest country, then we should be more. What I find is that whether we are talking about immigration, education, health, business, anything, I think what we are losing is the basic point, the honesty, the integrity, the humanity, trusting people, talking to people. And I feel the greatest thing we are missing is we are not good listeners. When we listen, a lot of things will come. And of course, politics, we are seeing what is going around. The civility is missing. And I think we need to be civil, whether we agree or disagree. But I think this is a wonderful conversation going on, and we can go into diversified field based on this conversation also. So thank you for it, all of you, for organizing it and taking part in it.
Thank you. If you all wanted someone to blame for our panelist, Dr. Jain, there's the smoking gun that just spoke.
Carl Jackson. Ma'am, I think you're helping me say what I wanted to say because it can be a little bit confusing. We used the word theology floated through as we were talking earlier. We talked about facts. It is so interesting. You can listen to the same situation that happens during the course of the day, and this channel sees one thing and another channel sees something totally different. But the facts are there. Beyond the facts, it has a whole lot to do with who we are in terms of how we respond. We can have the facts and respond so differently. So that being who we are has a lot to do with, folks, how well we do get along in this world. Our substance, our essence, because we can have the facts and respond in so many different ways. We can use those facts and make the world a better place. We can use those facts and make the world a worse place. So there's something to be said besides having the facts. It's in terms of how we respond to those facts, folks. Thank you.
Anyone want to reflect on that? Lucero, I think you're next in line. Put you on the spot. I'm just kidding. If you don't, that's fine. We're not going to force it. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Mary Lou Keller, and it's wonderful to see all these concerned people here. And I was wondering if you might have some ideas on how we can be more allies to people. But before I stop, I want to just say I work with the Literacy Council. There's a Mexican woman that I see once a week, and it is really great that I can share my power with her. She's undocumented, and she has a lot of problems, and she and her family often say to me that I am a big part of what makes them happy here. Because when things aren't going well, they can always say, oh, there's Marilu. So I think the Literacy Council and teaching English as a second language, you don't have to be a teacher to do that. That's great. Another really wonderful way I know is if you're a professional, if you're a doctor or a nurse or a lawyer, there are free services, and I know, Woody, you know this now, you have free services. So there are, if you want to volunteer, if you have that kind of special skill, the undocumented workers really need you. This is a crisis time for them, so. But share the power. And other ways that we can be allies to the immigrant community.
Thank you.
Do I have to stand up? Hi, I'm Carol Haddad, and I just want to thank you for having this panel. I recently returned from a few months in Newfoundland, Canada, and I was contrasting the receptivity of that populace to immigrants with this one. And I've been very depressed by it. I saw Syrians in hijabs on the beach. It was just beautiful. And here, we aren't the welcoming country that we were when my grandparents emigrated from Lebanon and Syria. Just switching topics, so I want to thank you, and I want to say I want to connect with you some more, because I've been depressed and wondered if I should even continue to live here. I have an option to go to Canada, and although I do like the warmth, but so that's, you know, I hope we can continue this conversation somehow. The other thing I wanted to say is I spent my career as an adult educator, as a professor in Michigan, and I do believe that people can be, to respond to what the gentleman said, people can see the light or rethink their assumptions when information is presented to them. Not presented, when they are taught to discover information and to understand fact from fiction. So I still believe in the power of education, and I'm looking for a way to contribute that in the community as well. But thank you all for being here. You enrich this community, and I think maybe I'll stay.
Good. Yeah, Luce had, and I
Nelson
think,
Mandela said, with education, you can change the world.
sure, and Luce.
Yeah, and Cesar Chavez said, your education is something that no one can take away from you. They cannot uneducate the educated. So we do agree. But I want to go back to the point of Canada, because I lived there for 16 years. There is a ministry of multiculturalism, and they foster the diversity in a way that we don't. And actually, in the United States, we talk about the melting pot. We don't really talk about integration. In order to be part of the melting pot, you have to melt. You know, nobody wants to lose their identity. In Canada, they talk about the fruit salad. You can still be your own fruit, have a specific flavor, but together as a fruit salad, it's the most wonderful thing. So.
There is one piece that you said that I think resonates with the gentleman 2 rows behind you, is what is key is the individual discovery in education, that you can't just throw it at them. And I think part of the process, the issue of this past political process, telling people they're idiots doesn't sway them to vote or behave a different way. And I'm going to ask you, Eddie, as a clinical psychologist, what is that process? Because I think one of the issues, and there's been some scholarship on this, of our dark age is that people are enclosing themselves in the same source of information. So they're getting that same source of quote-unquote facts, and they're bound then by that social network, if you will, of where their news and information comes from. And so in that world where we appreciate that education is through self-discovery and through a process of discovery of understanding, do you have any ideas on how do we break through that?
I think, first of all, one of the things we have to do is control the information. We haven't learned how to do that yet, unfortunately. It's just so much of it, all the time, 24/7. We haven't learned how to control it. And the human mind, we seek to simplify what we don't understand. That's how the mind works. In fact, one of the things that science does is take very complex ideas and makes it very simple. That's what an iPhone does, an intelligent phone does. Very complicated science reduced to make it to just things you can touch with your finger and it works. You don't need to understand science. But in terms of information, there's so much of it at you all the time and on every media that we try to simplify it. And one way to simplify it is to latch onto something you think you understand and then exclude everything else. And by doing that, what happens then when you do that, you have the worst information. You don't have the best. Because it's by keeping your mind open that you can make discoveries. When you close your mind off to information, because there's too much of it, it's actually painful if you try to listen to it all. You cut yourself from important information. So one of the things we have to do is really start to control the flow of information, start to ourselves minimize it to a level that we can understand. Music is wonderful, but if it's so loud it hurts your ears, you shut it off. And so when knowledge is so much of it, one of the things we have to do is either lower the volume or shut it off so that only a little bit of it get off. We haven't learned to do that yet. And maybe one of the things we have to do as a culture, start talking to each other how to limit information, how to reduce it in size, how to reduce it in volume so it starts making sense instead of it is now. Now it's yelling at you 24/7.
So there's something paradoxical that you're talking about. Number one, we have to be open-minded enough that we don't just seek the same source and we look. But then at the same time, we're limiting, which sounds like it could be censorship. And how do we? I know you're not saying it's censorship.
I'm not saying censorship. Yeah. I'm saying it's too much of it. Lower the
filters,
volume.
Right?
Filter it so that what you hear you can sample more easily. And I try to make an analogy between music. If you turn the volume up to 10 to this blasting out of your head, you can't understand the music. It hurts. But if you lower it to 3 and 4, you can hear it. And so we have to learn to lower the volume of information so we can process it. The way it is now, we can't process it.
Yeah. I see a public service campaign for Vicki Oldham to help us with on that maybe we can be a model for the nation on lowering the volume, filtering, and getting your news from a wide variety of sources to become informed civic actors. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm Ellen O'Sullivan, and I don't know how many of you have been trying to get in touch with your representatives at the federal level recently. I've done a great deal of that in the last 6 months, and let me tell you, their mailboxes are full. They tell you they're unable to answer their emails personally. And if you are able to get through, you can't even find out where their next public meeting is going to be. It's clear that I think we're being ignored. And I wonder if in Sarasota Manatee we can't begin to explore something like the sanctuary cities that they have in other parts of the country as a way to deal with this total disregard.
Does anyone want to speak to that issue?
Well, I think we've gone beyond the persistence because obviously they are not interested in talking to us and they are ignoring us. But then can we use another means, like letters to the newspapers, calling the radio stations, trying to get their attention by the media. the non-traditional media is a way to make our voices heard. But going back to the sanctuary city, I think, Kelly, you have more information than I do, because this is something that it's been discussed before. And it's not a simple process. It's just because we say, okay, we are going to declare ourselves a sanctuary city. It doesn't happen that way, especially now when the federal funding is being threatened to be taken away from all those sanctuary cities. But
Yeah. It is a complex issue. Number one, in a state like Florida, where the counties run the jails, to call yourself a sanctuary city really doesn't do anything. It's the sheriff who would have that power, particularly as an elected official, and then it's the sheriff that would decide whether he's going to act as an immigration officer, which is what people like the famous Sheriff Joe in Arizona was doing, and serving as an immigration officer. There was an article on the front page of yesterday's Tampa Bay Times about the immigration court backlogs, and there are now people, they talked about a woman from Thailand who has a green card. She came here legally with a green card. She has been in detention already for 300 days, and they suspect that it could be as much as 500 days before she gets a hearing, and I believe she has children under 18. And we are paying for that every day, too. And that came from, I believe, some type of a traffic stop that then led to her having something to do with the green card that legally allowed her to be detained. And that's just one vignette of, you want to talk about wasteful spending, unproductive, breaking apart families, and those stories abound. And I'm not sure if I'm helping you answer your question. Yeah. And I think everyone on this panel, including me, would appreciate what you're saying. I think the brass tacks of this, the frightening aspect of this is, all you have to do is look at Rick Scott's election, look at this past election. And if you want to move yourself in a position in a primary election that goes to really rally a base, and with all due respect to our current governor, any political scientist would tell you, his platform was, I'm going to pass an Arizona-style law in the state of Florida. And if you remember, no one knew who he was besides the issue of fraud with his healthcare company. And then he spent $12 million on media buys, saying that his opponent, who was the shoo-in to be governor, did not support an Arizona-style bill here in the state of Florida. Our current president followed a very similar, his first thing he said at his first press conference announcing his presidency was, they're rapists. These immigrants are rapists. That was the crux in Build the Wall. And so you now have, if you go around this country, in any primary election, particularly if you're a Republican right now, you would have the fear of God saying, I'm going to support DACA, I'm going to support Lucero, because there is that base that will show up in August, because you only have 20 or 30% who turn out, who are going to come from that gut reaction that they're illegal, they're freeloaders, and this is how our country's going to hell in a handbasket. And this is all made worse by the fact of gerrymandered districts that are now created to be, you win in the primary. And so if you're not furthest out there to the right, then it's going to be very difficult for you to get out of that primary alive. And so, what are the answers? Part of it comes to campaign finance reform. Another part comes to addressing the gerrymandering issue. And these are longer term issues. And so my fear is for Lucero and Lucero's family. And it's egregious, it's horrendous, it's heinous, and that it's happening in this country. And we need to be having more than just these conversations, but acting.
But that's why I think the local county level is the place to go, where we can see our elected officials face to face.
Without going into detail, I think we have collaborative individuals on the county level that can be engaged. And I would encourage you to engage with Sheriff Knight and Sheriff Wells in Manatee County. They have a multicultural staff. I think they've been very receptive in having conversations, and would encourage you to do that.
Kelly, last question.
Hi.
Hey.
I'm Derry Ronas, Dr. Ronas. It's nice to see you again.
You too.
Nice to see Dr. Renier. I moved to Sarasota 10 years ago after being in Delray Beach, Florida for 25 years. I'm a native New Yorker. My grandparents came from 4 countries, Bulgaria, Russia, Poland, and Austria. right before World War II. I am a very grateful adjunct professor at Sarasota Technical College, where when I first moved here, I asked the same question Dr. Renier did, which was, where are all the people of color? In Delray Beach, we have a very large Haitian population, and we started a high school for Haitian American students called Toussaint Louverture High School for Arts and Social Justice. I'm still waiting for the time where we're going to have a global passport saying we are, citizens of planet Earth, and we don't have to go through countries. That might be very naive. But the reason I'm standing here is because I am grateful to be this professor part-time, teaching ESOL. Thank you for the lady who's on the Literacy Council. I was shocked to know that we have over 1,000 immigrant students in Sarasota studying English morning, afternoons, and evenings. I teach there in the afternoons and the evenings. I have off tonight. And so I am amazed at the things that these students do. They're all adults. Some of them have come here under tremendous odds with what's going on in Venezuela, seeking political asylum. Our country is a very young country, but it's always stood for freedom. And I think that having these dialogues as we have, or Dr. Renier, when Dr. Iseldina Buelish was here, I was the moderator with you on the stage that evening. These conversations are critical to the unfolding evolution of consciousness of what will happen. We're going through, I tell my students, they're seeing American democracy at its best right now. With some people might say it's worst, but we're seeing Democrats and Republicans and other people engage in a dialogue of disagreement. And so it's a very precarious, dark time to be in, but conversations like these inspire me because of my students that give me inspiration when I hear of the stories of what they gave up in their countries to come here to be free. Doctors and people who are architects and just learning a language. And I've lived in other countries. I used to teach in the Bahamas and Belize. And, it's a wonderful thing to be able to have a country like this where we still stand for freedom. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here on your night off too, Derry. Any closing thoughts from our panelists?
I think what you were saying about contacting our elected officials, it's important. The only time you get to see them is when it's right before election time. And I think the main thing is our vote should count. And if you think you're not being represented, then we need to change those representatives that are our vote, that are speaking for what we believe in. And that's what's the most important right now.
Anyone else?
Yeah, first I want to thank you for a wonderful discussion, an open discussion, and let's have more.
Yeah, thank you. Luce?
Well, I am an optimist by nature, and I believe in kindness, in mercy, and love. So let's give ourselves that love that we need from each other to be able to make the changes that we want for the wonderful people that serve us and that we are obligated to serve. And this was amazing. Thank you so much, Julie, and everyone who was involved, and Kelly. And it's an honor to be here with all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe just some final closing thoughts. Oh, yes, thank you, Lucero.
Okay. I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, yeah, I kind of going off what Lou said. I think I'm an optimist, but more than that, I'm not fearful. My parents aren't fearful because I know that whatever happens is going to happen, and we should still fight for what we think is right, and we should still educate people on things that they might not know about. But I don't think there's any point in being fearful like a lot of people who aren't in my situation are. They're fearful for us. You shouldn't be fearful for us. Just believe in us and have hope, I think.
Thank you all. Thanks, Nate Jacobs and the staff here. Maybe just, yeah, thank you. So, final thought. I didn't know, but Dr. Rainier and my great-great-grandfather came over from the Black Forest in Germany. So we're going to call Henry Louis Gates and see if we're cousins. I believe I see the similarities. And then a quote that I just wanted to share, and it goes back to what we're talking about in our political system, that I think most of our elected officials will speak to their faith. And so it does get frustrating when we have these conversations that really should be about the basic element of humanity, and then it's ignored. And it was an FDR speech that he gave at Monticello, or the home of Thomas Jefferson. And even in 1936, the elephant in the room was the fact of Jefferson owning slaves. And FDR's quote was, "Theirs were not the gods of things as they were, but the gods of things as they ought to be." And I can't help but always reflect, and particularly this conversation about immigration in our country, if these folks that do represent us and they talk about their faith and what guides them, maybe one of these appeals that we do is, it's time in America that the gods that are our gods are also the gods of the way things are now in the 21st century in the United States. And so maybe that's the invocation that we send out to them, so that we could have such an incredibly talented, beautiful neighbor like Lucero and her family, and ensure that nothing would ever happen that threatens that. So thank you all for coming, for being open to the conversation. Please share it with your neighbors and friends. Have a great evening.